A man is sitting at a stranger's dinner table. A singer performs, and the guest quietly pulls his cloak over his head so nobody can see him crying. He arrived only the evening before. He still has not given his name. His hosts have asked him politely more than once. Finally, he says it, and the hall goes silent because the name belongs to a man everyone in the world had assumed was dead. What comes next is the most famous adventure story ever told. A one-eyed giant, a witch, an island of the dead, monsters in a strait. All of it delivered out loud by that guest after dinner about himself. And every man who could confirm a word of it is at the bottom of the sea. The poem has also warned us in its opening lines that this particular speaker is the most gifted liar in Greek literature. This is the Odyssey. 24 books, and almost nothing about its shape is what people expect. It does not begin where you think, and its hero is absent for 4. The monsters everyone remembers occupy about a quarter of it, and they are never shown. They are spoken. More than half of what remains happens after he gets home, in one house, mostly indoors, mostly in disguise. So here is what we are doing. Walking the entire route, in order, stop by stop, exactly as the poem lays it out. Cyclones, Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, the Wind King, the Cannibal Harbor, the Witch, the Dead, the Sirens, the Strait, the Cattle, the Nymph. And at every stop we mark the layer. What Homer actually wrote and what somebody else bolted on centuries afterwards. Because a great deal of what you picture when you hear the word Odyssey is not in the Odyssey at all. Start with the shape, because the shape is the argument. The Odyssey does not open with ships leaving Troy. It opens 10 years after that. The war is long finished. Every other Greek who survived it is already home. And the first 4 books do not follow Odysseus. They follow his son, a young man who has never met his father. His name is Telemachus. He goes hunting for news, and scholars call his stretch the Telemachy. A 6th of the poem, with the supposed hero off stage throughout. Odysseus finally appears in Book 5. He is not fighting anything. He is sitting on a beach on an island, crying. He has been on that beach for 7 years, held by a goddess who has offered to make him immortal, and he keeps refusing. He builds a raft, is wrecked, and washes up among a people called the Phaeacians. So by the end of Book 8, there has been no monster at all. They arrive all at once in Books 9 through 12, and they arrive as speech. Odysseus stands up at that dinner table and narrates his own wanderings in the first person for 4 solid books. That is the single most important structural fact about the Odyssey. The monsters are not something the poem shows you. They are something a character claims, and Homer flags it. The Phaeacian king interrupts to say that Odysseus does not strike him as the sort of man who invents things. Nobody says that out loud unless the thought has already occurred to them. Meanwhile, the poem's opening has told us that every companion died. He is the sole survivor of his own story, and therefore its only source. Nobody is left alive to check a word of it. And in the second half we watch him lie. To a swineherd, to his own father, to his own wife. Homer's line, he made his falsehoods look like truth. And that same dinner party contains the thing almost everyone gets wrong about the Trojan War. Odysseus asks the singer for one particular song. He asks for the wooden horse, because the wooden horse is not in the Iliad. People assume it must be. It is the most famous image of that war, and the Iliad is the poem about that war. But the Iliad stops before the city falls. Its final line is about a funeral, the burial of Hector, tamer of horses. Troy is still standing when it ends. Achilles is still alive. There is no horse anywhere in the poem. The horse is told in retrospect, inside the Odyssey, at a banquet, by a hired singer, at the request of the man who invented it. There is a second telling 4 books earlier, from Helen. She walks around the horse in the dark, calling up in the voice of each man's wife. One of them nearly answers. And the full-dress version you actually picture, with the doomed priest and the sea serpents, is Roman. It is Virgil, 7 centuries later. So, the route. He leaves Troy with 12 ships, which is exactly the number the Iliad's catalog assigns him. He will arrive home alone, asleep, on a foreign vessel, with nothing he set out with. This is how that happens. The first stop is not a monster. It is a raid on a real town, Ismarus, belonging to a people called the Cyclops. They sack it and take the plunder. Then the crew refuses to leave and sits on the beach drinking the wine they have stolen. The Cyclops fetch reinforcements from inland, and each ship loses half a dozen men. This is the only ordinary human violence in the whole tale. Then a storm carries them round the southern cape, off every chart they know, to the land of the Lotus Eaters. Nobody is eaten here. The Lotus Eaters are hospitable. They share their food with the scouting party, and the food is the problem. Anyone who tastes it stops wanting to go home. Odysseus drags them back to the ships and lashes them under the rowing benches, weeping. Then the island of the Cyclopes. And notice what Odysseus openly admits. Nobody forced him ashore. He goes because he is curious. He wants to see what kind of creature lives there and whether it will hand over a guest gift. So he takes a picked party and some very strong wine. They walk into a cave stacked with cheeses and penned lambs and settle down to wait for the owner. The owner is Polyphemus. Homer says he is not like a man who lives on bread. He is like a wooded peak standing alone above the ridges. He seals the entrance with a doorstone that 22 wagons could not have lifted, and then asks who they are. Then he eats 2 of them. The escape needs a name, so Odysseus supplies one. Nobody. My mother calls me Nobody, he says. My father, all my friends. They get him drunk. They sharpen a stake of olive wood and harden it in the embers. And in the dark they take his one eye. He bellows. The other Cyclopes run to the cave and shout through the rock, asking who is hurting him. Nobody, he answers. They go back to bed. At dawn he sits in the doorway running his hands over the backs of his sheep. The men go out underneath the animals, roped in 3s. Then Odysseus does the stupidest thing in the poem. Safely offshore, he shouts his real name at the island, so the blinded giant can name him to his father Poseidon. The curse is precise. Late, alone, on a stranger ship, with trouble waiting at home. That prayer is the entire plot of Everything Left. Next, a floating island ringed with an unbroken wall of bronze, where the king of the winds lives with his sons and daughters. Aeolus is not a god. He is a man Zeus has given a job, and he does Odysseus an enormous favor before anyone has to ask. He bottles every wind that could blow them off course in a sack made from the hide of a 9-year-old ox, and leaves out the west wind. 9 days of open sailing, and on the 10th they are close enough to see men tending fires on the shore of Ithaca. Odysseus, who has not slept once, sleeps. The crew decide the sack is gold he is hiding from them, and open it. Aeolus refuses to help a second time. The next harbor is beautiful. Cliffs on both sides, a narrow entrance, water like glass. The whole fleet moors comfortably inside it. Odysseus alone ties up outside, at the rock. He never explains why. It saves his life. Homer adds an odd note here. The paths of night and day run close together, and a man who never slept could earn 2 wages. The inhabitants are giants. They stand on the cliff tops, dropping boulders into the anchorage, then wade in and spear the swimmers like fish. 11 ships never leave. Which brings the survivors to Aea, and to the most misunderstood figure in the poem. Circe is not a hag in a hut. She is a goddess, a daughter of the sun, and sister to the king who owned the golden fleece. A scouting party hears her singing at a great loom. She feeds them, drugs the wine, touches them with a wand, and pens them as pigs. And Homer specifies the horror exactly. Body of a pig, voice of a pig, bristles of a pig, and the mind inside entirely unchanged. Hermes stops Odysseus on the path with a plant called moly, black at the root, milk white at the flower, dangerous for a mortal to dig. The drug fails, the whole encounter reverses, and Circe becomes his ally. She restores the crew and keeps the lot of them for a full year. The crew has to remind him to leave, and it is Circe who tells him what is ahead. The Sirens, the strait, the cattle. The route is her briefing. The jealous poisoner of later tradition is a different Circe. Hesiod already gives her sons by Odysseus. Ovid supplies the transformations. Homer does neither. What she sends him to next is not a monster. It is a ghost. He has to consult a dead prophet before he can go anywhere. So they sail to the edge of the world, to a coast under permanent fog where the sun never shows, and the people are called Cimmerians. He does not go down into the underworld. He digs a pit, pours offerings, cuts 2 throats over it, and the dead come up to the blood. The first ghost is nobody famous. A crewman called Elpenor, who got drunk on Circe's roof, fell off, and is still lying there unburied. Then Tiresias, and the warning is blunt. Leave the cattle of the sun alone, and you may all get home. Touch them, and you will not. He also hands over an errand the poem never shows completed. Take an oar and walk inland, until you meet people who have never seen a ship. People who put no salt in their food, and who look at the oar on your shoulder and call it a winnowing fan. Plant it there. Then, says the prophet, death will come to you from the sea, gently in a comfortable old age. Hold that sentence. We come back to it. Then his own mother, whose death he did not know about. He reaches for her 3 times and closes his arms on nothing at all. Then Achilles, told that he rules the dead, answering that he would rather be a landless man's farmhand. Then Ajax, who refuses to speak and walks off into the dark. Back to Circe for sailing directions, and then the most famous stretch of the voyage, which almost nobody remembers accurately. The instructions are exact. Knead beeswax and plug the crew's ears. Have them tie you upright to the mast and refuse to loosen the ropes. Homer does tell us where the Sirens sit, in a meadow, and heaped around them the bones of rotting men with the skin shriveling on them. He tells us what they offer too, and it is not seduction. They sing that they know everything that happened at Troy and everything that happens on earth. It is a knowledge trap aimed at one weakness, and this is the man who walked into a giant's cave because he wondered who lived there. And here is what Homer never does. He never describes them, not the bodies, not the faces, and not the wings, because he never mentions wings. The bird shape comes from Greek painting and from poets writing much later. The fishtail, the mermaid, is medieval, 1,000 years downstream. Then the strait, where Circe's advice is not to fight but to choose. In the higher cliff, sunk to the waist in a lightless cave, is Scylla. 12 misshapen dangling feet, and 6 necks of extraordinary length, each ending in a head that trawls the water below for dolphins and sharks. In every one of those mouths, 3 close-packed rows of teeth, and her voice, Homer says, is the yelp of a newborn puppy. Below the other cliff is Charybdis, who is not a creature but an appetite. 3 times a day she swallows the sea, and 3 times she vomits it back. Circe is brutal about it. You cannot beat Scylla, row past and lose 6 men, or stop to fight and lose the ship. He warns the crew about the whirlpool and says nothing about Scylla. She takes 6 men off the deck, and he calls it the most pitiful sight of his life. Which brings us to the island where the poem's whole moral machinery is standing in the open, chewing grass. Thrinacia. 7 herds of cattle and 7 flocks of sheep, 50 head in each, that never breed and never die. Both the goddess and the prophet have named this place. Odysseus wants to sail past. The exhausted crew overrule him, and the wind then pins them there for a month. The stores run out. And Eurylochus argues that of all the ways to die, starving to death on a beach is the most miserable of them. So they kill the cattle, and the omens are immediate and grotesque. The flayed hides crawl along the sand, and the meat lows on the spits. When they finally sail, Zeus puts a thunderbolt into the ship. Every man aboard goes into the water, and only one of them comes out. Odysseus rides the wreckage back through the strait, hanging off a fig tree above the whirlpool until it spits the timber up again. He drifts 9 days. Then he reaches the island of Ogygia, and the adventure simply stops dead for the next 7 years. Calypso offers to make him deathless and ageless. He turns it down every day for the length of a war, and there the tale catches up with the poem. The Phaeacians believe him. They load him with more treasure than he would ever have carried home from Troy, and sail him to Ithaca overnight. He sleeps the whole crossing. They carry him ashore still asleep, stack the gifts beside him, and go. Poseidon, still owed, turns their ship to stone within sight of their own harbor. That is the last we see of the sea. He wakes on a beach he does not recognize, in a fog Athena has put there, and his first thought is that he has been robbed. There are 12 books left, and no voyage in any of them. Everything remaining happens on one small island, and most of it indoors. This is the part the summaries skip, which is strange, because it is the part the poem is actually about. Athena disguises him as an old man, skin ruined, hair gone, rags. Then she stands in front of him and asks who he is, and he lies to her, fluently, with names and geography. She laughs, drops the disguise, and tells him he is incorrigible even by the standards of gods. Then the poem does something no summary survives. It goes to a pig farm, and it stays there. Eumaeus the swineherd feeds the beggar, gives him the better bedding, and talks about the master he assumes is dead. Whole books pass this way. His son comes home. Father and son recognize each other, and Telemachus flatly refuses to believe it. He thinks a god is toying with him. Then the beggar walks into his own courtyard, and something lying on the dung heap lifts its head. Argos. Odysseus reared this dog himself and sailed for Troy before it was old enough to hunt. Now it lies in the muck, eaten with vermin. He cannot cross the yard to it without giving himself away, so he turns his face aside and wipes off a tear where the swineherd will not see. The dog wags its tail. It flattens both ears. It has no strength left to stand, and having seen its master after 20 years, it dies. That is the poem's method in miniature. No weapons, no monster. A man nobody can recognize, and one creature that recognizes him anyway. It happens again that evening. The old nurse is told to wash the beggar's feet, and her hands find a scar above the knee. A boar tore it open on a hunt on Parnassus when he was a boy. She knows it instantly. The foot drops, the bronze basin rings, the water goes everywhere. Joy and terror arrive together, and Odysseus takes her by the throat and tells her very quietly to say nothing. Next day Penelope announces a contest. Her husband's bow, 12 axe heads set in a line, and a single arrow sent through all of them. Not one suitor can bend the bow far enough to string it. The beggar asks for a turn, is laughed at, and is handed it anyway. He strings it the way a musician strings a lyre, and tests the string with his thumb, and it sings. Outside, Zeus sends thunder. There are 108 of them in that hall. The doors are already barred, and the armor has already been carried out of the room. We're not going to stage what follows. Homer gives it an entire book, and it is among the ugliest passages in Greek epic. What matters is the room afterwards. Lamps lit, the nurse called in, and Odysseus telling her not to cheer over dead men. And then the scene the whole poem has been building towards. It is not a reunion. Penelope comes down and refuses to accept him. Washed, dressed, standing in front of her, proven by a massacre, and she sits opposite him in silence and will not say his name. Move the master's bed out of the bedchamber, she says, and Odysseus loses his temper completely. Who moved my bed? Nobody could move that bed, because he built it himself. There was an olive tree growing in the courtyard. He built the room around it and cut the bed from the living trunk. The stump is still in the ground. The bed cannot be moved because the bed is a tree. 2 people alive know that. That is the recognition, not the scar, not the bow, not the killing. A secret about carpentry that only a marriage could hold. She runs at him then and holds on, and Homer compares her relief to swimmers sighting land after a shipwreck, which is his image, not hers. 2 Alexandrian scholars thought the poem should stop right there, at the bed. What follows in Book 24 has been argued over ever since. It goes back to the dead, and out to a farm where Laertes is grieving, and Odysseus tells one more pointless lie to his own father before relenting. Then the dead men's families come for revenge. Athena stops the fight, and the Odyssey ends on a truce, mid-motion, with the prophet's errand still outstanding. Because the oar has not been carried inland, and the phrase about his death is deliberately slippery. The Greek can mean away from the sea, or out of it. A later Greek poem, now lost, took the second reading. Circe, sung by Odysseus, sails to Ithaca and kills him with a spear tipped in stingray spine. That is not Homer. Neither is the cynic of Athenian tragedy, nor Dante's Ulysses, damned for sailing too far west. Each is a later age remaking him. And what Homer handed them is not a monster slayer. It is a man whose entire monster catalog is unwitnessed hearsay told once at dinner by the only survivor. The parts of the poem with no witnesses are the parts the world remembers. The parts with witnesses are a dog, a scar, and a bed, which may be the point. You can survive anything at sea. Being known again by the people you left behind is the harder crossing.